Tonight, I want to talk to you about my latest book, Sister Liguori, the nun who divided a nation. It was published in July last year, and some of you were there at the Sydney launch, which took place in the old Supreme Court building in King Street, which was the scene of the court case in 1921, which is described in the book. And tonight, I will relate to you how I came to write the book before discussing why I think the Sister Liguori story continues to resonate more than a century after the affair had died down. And then for the pièce de résistance, I will show you video interviews I conducted with the two main characters, one of whom died in 1939 and the other in 1966. So very tricky, but we'll get there, we hope. Some of you may have already bought a copy of the book, and some may even have read it. But for those unfamiliar with the story, I will give firstly a brief outline of the facts. The story begins in July 1920 when Irish-born Sister Liguori, also known as Bridget Partridge, of the Presentation Order, flees Mount Erin Convent, Wagga Wagga, dressed only in her nightdress and bare feet, fearful she is about to be murdered by her Mother Superior. Her flight takes her to the nearby house of Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, a Protestant couple with links to the Loyal Orange Institution, a militant Protestant organisation also known as the Orange Order. Evading police and convent search parties who are fearful she might have drowned in a waterhole or suffered exposure on that cold winter night, the Thompsons smuggle her out of Wagga Wagga the next day to Adelong, about 80 kilometres away. From there, she is taken to Sydney by Robert Barton, Grand Master of the Orange Order. The police eventually locate her in Sydney, and she is arrested under the Lunacy Act as being deemed insane and without sufficient means of support, pursuant to a warrant issued at the request of her bishop, Dr. Joseph Dwyer. She is detained at the Darlinghurst Reception House for psychiatric assessment. When the doctors declare Bridget to be sane, the Lunacy Court orders her release. There are wild scenes outside the court as Protestants and Catholics jostle and debate the merits of the case. Thereafter, Bridget goes to live with a congregational minister, William Tutchell, and his wife, Laura. Around the country, the Orange Order organises meetings to protest against women being held in Catholic convents. Calls are made for the inspection of convents and even for their abolition. Catholic bishops and Catholic newspapers respond, defending the convents. Each side accuses the other of mistreating Sister Liguori. To Protestants, she is an escaped nun whom they have rescued. To Catholics, she is a captured nun whom the Protestants are holding against her will. The controversy plays out in newspapers, not only in Australia, but also in New Zealand, and reaching as far as England, Ireland, Canada, and America. There are threatened fisticuffs in the New South Wales Parliament as Catholic and Protestant MPs debate calls for a royal commission into convents. The Orange Order claims that armed Catholic gunmen followed Bridget Partridge to Berry on the New South Wales south coast, and that Protestant ex-servicemen intended to storm the Mount Erin convent. The police and the RSL deny these claims. In an attempt to persuade Bridget to leave her Protestant friends, the Catholic Federation, a militant Catholic organisation, fetches her brother Joseph from Hong Kong, where he is working. They bring him to Sydney in secret to prevent the Orange Order from intercepting him. It is to no avail, however, as Bridget refuses to go with him. The Orange Order funds an action by Bridget in the New South Wales Supreme Court, claiming damages from Bishop Dwyer for falsely and maliciously procuring her arrest and imprisonment. The case plays out in a packed courtroom, with newspapers across the country providing daily verbatim accounts of the evidence. Hoping to get a seat in the gallery, hundreds queue outside the court each morning, sometimes in the rain. While the case is being heard in Sydney, there is violence in the Riverina, with Reverend Tutchell being assaulted at Coolamon and Marra at meetings to establish in those towns branches of the Protestant Federation, another militant Protestant organisation. After 10 days of hearing, the jury rejects Bridget's claim. The Catholics declare victory with a monster meeting in the town hall, following which the fuss dies down. It reignites 3 months later when Joseph and a gang of Catholic men kidnap his sister off the streets of Kogarah as she is returning from a church service with the Tutchells. The police intervene and arrange a meeting at which Bridget convinces her brother she wishes to remain with the Tutchells. Joseph withdraws and returns to Ireland. The episode erupts again in Parliament, with the opposition leader moving a vote of censure against the Labor government for allowing Joseph to escape justice. The motion is lost, with some opposition members supporting the government. After 16 months, the Sister Liguori affair finally comes to an end. For the next 40 years, Bridget remains in the Tutchell household, ever fearful the Catholics will kidnap her again. In 1939, her fragile mental health leads the Tutchells to have her psychiatrically examined at the Darlinghurst Reception House, where she had been incarcerated 19 years before. Unlike her previous appearance in 1920, Bridget is not declared sane and released. Instead, she is admitted to Parramatta Mental Hospital, where she remains as an inpatient for the next 7 years. In 1946, she returns to the Tutchell household. In 1954, Reverend Tutchell dies and the two women continue to live together. In 1962, unable to care for themselves and, according to their doctor, living in appalling squalor, Laura and Bridget are admitted to Rydalmere Psychiatric Hospital, where Mrs. Tutchell dies the following year. Now all alone, Bridget dies in December 1966. A few days later, the woman who had once been a household name in Australia is buried in obscurity at Rookwood Cemetery. Only one mourner is present, Sheila Turl, a former student she had known at Mount Erin Convent. I'll now tell you how I came to write a book about the Sister Liguori story. I first came across the story in the late 1990s when researching religious sectarianism in Australia for my PhD thesis on the Catholic Federation of New South Wales, called Troubled Times. The story formed only a small part of the overall thesis, which I published as Tearing the Fabric, Sectarianism in Australia 1910 to 1925. But I was so intrigued by the affair that I determined to dig deeper into it. In 2002, while in Ireland for a history conference, I interviewed Bridget Partridge's niece, Ethna Flanagan, the daughter of Joseph Partridge. I did so again in 2005, following another conference in Ireland. In that same year, I presented a paper on the affair at the Australian Catholic Historical Society conference in Sydney. The paper was published in the Society's Journal in 2006 as Where Crows Gather, the Sister Liguori Affair, 1920 to 21. During those years, I often sat down to write a book on the Sister Liguori Affair, only to be diverted by other projects. Also, I was still in full-time practice as a barrister, which limited the time I could devote to historical pursuits. So the Sister Liguori story was on the back burner. Nevertheless, events occurred that rekindled my interest. In 2010, Maureen McEwen, a great niece of Bridget Partridge, living in Northern Ireland, contacted me to say she had read my article, Where Crows Gather, and wanted to look further into the affair. We met up in Sydney in 2012 and exchanged information. Maureen was determined to write a book, about her great aunt. In 2016, an historian friend of mine, Anne Cunningham, some of you will know her, told me she was interested in pursuing the Sister Liguori story. Anne had written The Price of a Wife, The Priest and the Divorce Trial, a book about the Conyngham affair, that other great sectarian scandal of early 20th century Australia, where Cardinal Moran's secretary, Monsignor O'Haran, had been named as co-respondent in divorce proceedings. Recognising that I was unlikely to get back to Sister Liguori anytime soon and believing it to be a story that should be told, I handed to Anne all my research notes. Anne presented a paper, The Runaway Nun, at a history conference in Adelaide that year, but otherwise she too was unable to pursue the project and she returned my notes. In 2017, Maureen McEwen eventually published The Extraordinary Case of Sister Liguori. It is a work of creative non-fiction rather than history, and I was asked to write a review for the Journal of the Australian Catholic Historical Society. As a work of creative non-fiction, I thought that Maureen's book had captured well the feelings that Bridget might have felt as her personal problems became the subject of intense public debate. But it did not explain how and why Bridget Partridge came to be the centre of public attention for 16 months in the press, the Parliament, and at public meetings. I knew the story still needed to be told. What finally determined me to bring the Sister Liguori affair forward from the back burner was an article that appeared in the Sydney Morning Herald in April 2023 under the headline, "Pregnant to a Priest, Run, Nun on the Run, Defied Church Over Child." The journalist claimed he had solved the 100-year-old mystery of why she had done so. I quote, "The nun was made pregnant by a clergy member, and the reason she fled was due to threats to her life after she refused to relinquish the child to the church for adoption," unquote. But apart from a hearsay account of a man born 15 years after Sister Liguori left the convent, the article provided no evidence to support the allegations. Moreover, there has never been any mystery as to why Bridget Partridge left the convent. When she gave evidence at her court case against the bishop, she explained in detail her reasons, none of which even hinted at a clerical pregnancy. Moreover, the Orange Order never once, in its relentless attacks on the Catholic Church during the affair, made such a claim. Apart from lacking evidence to support the allegation, the article, which appeared in the news section of the Herald, was riddled with factual errors. Clearly, the time had come for me to write the true history of the Sister Liguori affair, which I did during the remainder of 2023. Now, the Sister Liguori affair occurred more than 100 years ago, yet it refuses to go away. Every now and again, it resurfaces in both scholarly journals and in the mass media. In the latter category are the following examples. In 1954, People magazine ran a 6-page piece on the affair. In 1980, the Sydney Morning Herald's Good Weekend magazine published a feature article by the Herald's religious affairs reporter, Alan Gill. In the early 2000s, emerging Australian playwright Diane Stubbings wrote a play about the affair. Although not produced, it was given an informal reading with a young Kate Blanchett playing Sister Liguori. In 2017, Maureen McEwen's book appeared. In 2019, the Sydney Morning Herald carried a story on Maureen McEwen's book. In 2021, the Wagga Daily Advertiser carried a story on the centenary of the court case. In 2021, artist Amanda Bromfield marked the centenary of the affair with an exhibition at the Wagga Wagga Art Gallery, incorporating ceramics, found objects, and a video performance. And in 2023, the Sydney Morning Herald published the erroneous article. At its most basic level, the Sister Liguori affair is the story of a young woman, Bridget Partridge, who discovers she is no longer suited to the religious life she had chosen a decade before, but feels trapped, unable to face the humiliating process of applying to her bishop, Joseph Dwyer, for a dispensation from her vows. After months of brooding in which her health, physical and mental, deteriorates, she snaps, and in a moment of frustration, she flees the convent under a paranoid delusion. Now, in 9 out of 10 cases, such a crisis would have passed unremarkably. Sister Liguori's flight would have been seen as a cry for help, prompting her religious community to adopt a pastoral approach to her problems, helping her to reconcile herself with religious life or assisting her to return to her family in Ireland. But in this case, Bridget faithfully took refuge in the house of a Protestant family with links to the Orange Order. Once she had placed herself under the protection of the Orange Order, she was no longer a young woman with personal issues to be resolved in a quiet and caring manner. Instead, she had become an object in the centuries-old struggle between Protestantism and Catholicism. She was now a trophy to be fought over in a conflict which Grandmaster Barton described as a fight to the end, adding, and I quote, "It is Rome versus the Orange Institution in this matter," unquote. On the other side, Catholic MP Paddy Moynihan said that if the Protestants tried to interfere with the convents, quote, "there would be a mess up here as bad as anything that occurred on the plains of Flanders." As the judge said at the end of the court case, I quote, "I cannot help thinking that it is a very unfortunate thing for the plaintiff that at that time she did not meet somebody who would have shown a little common horse sense," unquote. But the Sister Liguori story is not unique. It is an ancient tale dating back at least to the Mycenaean age with the story of Helen of Troy, popularized by Homer, whose kidnapping sparked a war between the Greeks and the Trojans. And we have seen it played out in our own times, most spectacularly in 2005, with the severely brain-damaged Terri Schiavo over her right to die. And in 2000, with Elian Gonzalez, a 5-year-old Cuban refugee, over his repatriation to Cuba. It is a tale in which powerful adversaries pull at a hapless victim, like children fighting over a rag doll. In a struggle they frame in Manichaean terms, life and death, good and evil, while at the same time proclaiming their motivation is the individual's best interest. And to me, this is the reason why the Sister Liguori story continues to captivate the public imagination. It is a story with a universal theme that resonates down the ages, even if it did take me 25 years to write the book. I'll now play my interviews with Bridget Partridge and Bishop Dwyer, in which you will hear Bridget explain why she left the convent the way she did, and the bishop will explain the reasons he had her arrested under the Lunacy Act. Now, these video interviews were made possible by artificial intelligence, image generation, from original black and white photos of Bridget and the bishop. However, the words you will hear Bridget and the bishop speak are the exact words they used in the court case when they gave their evidence as reported in the Sydney Morning Herald. Now, I'll now ask Natalie to play the video.
Our first interview is with Bridget Partridge, formerly Sister Liguori, who in July 1920 left her convent at Mount Erin, Wagga Wagga, in controversial circumstances. Bridget Partridge, thanks for agreeing to do this interview. Perhaps the question that most people would like answered is, why did you run away from Mount Erin Convent?
I had become dissatisfied with conventual life, and on account of a dispute over a broom, when Sister Joan accused me of lying, I decided to leave the convent.
That was the first time you left, and that was on Saturday the 24th of July. What time did you leave?
About 12:30. I went out the back way and went to Mrs. Burgess's house.
And why did you do that?
I intended to wait there until order had been restored.
Now, while you were at Mrs. Burgess's house, you tried to ring Bishop Dwyer.
Yes, I wanted to tell him where I was staying and to explain the incident.
Over the broom?
Yes. But when I rang, I was told he was in Albury.
What happened then?
I remained at Mrs. Burgess's for several hours. And then, between 4 and 5, Mother Clare and Sister Brendan came to take me back to the convent.
What happened when you went back?
I was told to go to bed by the Reverend Mother. When I got upstairs, Sister Brendan started to make up my bed. I told her I was well and fit to make it myself. Then holy water was shaken round my bed by Sister Brendan.
Did you see the doctor that evening?
Yes, Dr. Lay came to the convent. He said, "So you are run down, sister." I said, "Yes, doctor." I was asked to put out my tongue. No further questions were asked about my health, and no examination was made. The Angelus bell rang, and he then said goodbye. I was told to go to bed by the Reverend Mother, and I went to bed as told, and Sister Brendan came up and said, "Here's a dose of oil for you." When I drank it, she said, "You won't want another dose, sister." Sister Brendan then took the pillows from my head, placed my hands by my side, and said, "You won't get out of this bed for the next 6 months."
Now, you've said that you thought that Sister Brendan gave you poison in the castor oil.
Yes, I really thought it was poison.
Why did you think that?
This conviction is based on the agonizing look on the doctor's face during the Angelus. The Reverend Mother could not look at me at all. There was certainly castor oil in the cup, but to a very small degree, and the oil was of a darkish colour, which tasted like ink.
But wasn't the practice to mix castor oil with black coffee, a dose that was never agreeable?
Yes. But also, Sister Brendan told me to lie quite still and not to move, and that I would sleep for 6 months. Other things were said about death to convince me I was to die.
What happened next?
Because I was suspicious it was not all oil, I got out of bed and drank 3 cups of soapy water and went to the lavatory and brought up the dose as best I could.
Did you then go back to bed?
No. Sister Brendan had told me she would get a hot water bottle for my feet. I told her I would be in bed by the time she came back. When Sister Brendan went downstairs to get the hot water bottle, I made my escape.
Now, you were only in your nightdress and bare feet.
Yes. I thought that if I went to get my clothes, I would never get a chance to get away again.
Which way did you go?
I went to Mrs. Burgess's. She asked me to remain for the night, but, growing afraid, I asked her to take me further away.
Where did you go then?
We went to the Church of England hostel, which was locked up, and then to Mrs. Thompson's.
And you stayed there for the night?
Yes.
Now, the next morning you were examined by Dr. Tivy and you spoke to Inspector Dupre.
Yes.
Did you tell them you believed you had been given poison and that the Mother Superior, Sister Brendan, and Dr. Lay had tried to murder you?
No, but I told Mrs. Thompson.
Why did you not tell the Inspector of Police?
I did not think of it at the time. I thought it sufficient to tell Mrs. Thompson, and if she thought it necessary to mention it, she would do so.
Do you still think it was deliberately planned to murder you?
I am in two minds. I think there was some punishment intended for me, that I was going to be punished for running away. I think now that it was a sleeping draught for some further ill treatment they were planning ahead.
That is what you think now, that you were to be sent asleep and then tortured in your sleep?
Ill-treated.
By whom?
By the sisters.
While you were unconscious?
I would not be fully unconscious.
Is that the view you have brought yourself now to take of it?
Yes.
Thank you, Miss Partridge, for speaking with us today and giving us an understanding of why you left the convent back then. Our next interview is with Dr. Joseph Dwyer, Bishop of Wagga Wagga from 1918 to 1939. Bishop Dwyer, thank you for agreeing to this interview.
Thanks for having me.
Did you know Sister Liguori, now Bridget Partridge, before she fled the Mount Erin convent on Saturday the 24th of July 1920?
Yes, but I knew very little about her. I met her, I think, on 3 occasions to speak to, and on these occasions I would not have seen her for more than 2 minutes.
One of these occasions was earlier that year when you put to her the questions you are required to, namely, are you in good health? Have you any complaint to make to me as bishop? And are you perfectly happy and contented?
That was on my episcopal visit in May.
Did she give any indication of being dissatisfied?
None whatever.
What are your duties with regard to a member of a religious community who may desire to leave?
I have a duty under canon law to investigate cases of complaints or unhappiness, if any, and see if they can be in any way remedied. If the complainant wishes deliberately to leave the community, I have to see that arrangements are made that she is decently conveyed back to parents, relatives, or friends.
You were in Albury the weekend Sister Liguori left the convent. But when you returned on the Monday afternoon, Father Barry filled you in on what had happened. He also gave you a letter that Sister Liguori had written to you, in which she wrote that Dr. Lay had given her poison to end her life, that she had fled from the Mount Erin convent and did not wish to go back, where her deathbed had been fixed for her, as she said. Did you write a letter in reply?
Yes. I wrote 2 letters. One to Sister Liguori, and one to Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. In the letter to Sister Liguori I wrote, I have just returned from Albury and received the letter you sent to me. I regret the course you have taken without consulting me and am willing to see you if you wish. I asked Father Barry to deliver the letters, but Mrs. Thompson refused to accept the one addressed to Sister Liguori.
The next day, in the company of Inspector Dupre, you called on Mrs. Thompson to personally deliver the letter, and she told you Sister Liguori was not there. Did you believe her?
Mrs. Thompson said, she is not here now, she has gone away. Mrs. Thompson added that Sister Liguori went away on the Sunday afternoon. I was still of the opinion that the sister was in the house. Later that day I asked Police Sergeant Gallagher if he would be good enough to have the letter intended for Sister Liguori delivered at Thompson's house. He returned with the letter, it not having been delivered. On the same afternoon, still believing the sister was at the Thompsons, I asked Mr. Burns, a stock and station agent, to deliver the letter to her. Mrs. Thompson again said that Sister Liguori was not there. Presently Archdeacon Pike emerged from a room at the house, and said to Mr. Burns, I give you my word, Sister Liguori is not here. She is in another town and is all right.
What did you do next?
I was still not sure that the Sister Liguori had left Wagga. I had conflicting statements and had no idea where she was, although I suspected she had gone somewhere. I intended to go to Sydney that night, but as it had been reported to me that Dr. Lay was of the opinion that the sister was deranged, I rang him up and told him I was leaving for Sydney and asked if he had expressed the opinion that Sister Liguori was deranged. Dr. Lay replied that he had. I asked, "Will you give a written certificate to that effect?" He said he would the next day. I went to Sydney that night.
In Sydney, you spoke to the Attorney General, who referred you to the Inspector General of Police.
Yes. I told the Inspector General the facts as I knew them and showed him the letter I had received from Sister Liguori. He simply said, "This letter does not seem to be written by a person of normal mind." He promised to ring up the inspector at Wagga and ask him if he could locate the sister.
The next morning, you received a reply from the Inspector General stating he had received a wire from Inspector Dupre to the effect that Archdeacon Pike refused to say where Sister Liguori was at present, but that she was well cared for.
Yes.
And that Dupre had said that Sister Liguori appeared perfectly sane and rational when he saw her on the 25th.
Yes.
And that Dr. Tivy had told Dupre he could find no indication of insanity and that she was perfectly normal.
Yes.
That was all in the Inspector General's letter.
Yes.
What did you do next?
I left for Wagga the same night. The next morning Inspector Dupre said that Archdeacon Pike knew where Sister Liguori was and that he would give me some information if I applied to him. I replied, "What has Archdeacon Pike got to do with it?" I also said that I would not go near him, or any of the mob with him.
Now, this I don't understand. If you were anxious to learn of Sister Liguori's whereabouts, why did you not ring up Archdeacon Pike?
First of all, I had a report from Burns, whom I had sent as my messenger to deliver the letter, that Archdeacon Pike said he knew where the girl was, and would not tell.
You said you would not go within a mile of him and his crowd. What did you mean by that?
There was so much secrecy. I did not know who these people were. They had lied to us and lied to the police. Who was I to believe?
Now, you returned to Sydney a few days later.
Yes. I saw the Inspector General again on the 5th of August, and he showed me a wire saying that nothing could be learned of Sister Liguori after an exhaustive search. The Inspector General said he would ring up Mr. Camfin, a magistrate who knew a lot about these matters. The Inspector General rang Mr. Camfin, and had a conversation with him. He told me Mr. Camfin was of opinion that he could issue a warrant on the information I had.
What happened next?
I then went to the Solicitor General's office, and Mr. Sproul very kindly offered to hear what I had to say. I gave him my account of the whole affair as far as I knew it and told him about Dr. Tivy's opinion. I think I also told him about the interview between the Inspector General and Mr. Camfin. I asked Mr. Sproul for advice, and he said that if he had the power he would issue a warrant on that information.
You then went and saw Mr. Camfin?
Yes. I told Mr. Camfin I had been informed that Dr. Tivy said she was normal and that Dr. Lay said she was of deranged mind and had given a sworn declaration to that effect. I then produced the letter which Sister Liguori had written to me, and Mr. Camfin said he would issue a warrant. Mr. Camfin said he wanted me to swear that I deemed her to be of unsound mind, and without visible means of support, and I did so.
Mr. Camfin then issued the warrant for Sister Liguori's arrest. Now, before moving on, why did you not apply to the magistrate at Wagga Wagga for the warrant?
I had applied to the local police and I was informed by Mr. Sheikey that the local court refused it, the magistrate declining to take the responsibility on himself without seeing the patient.
It was Dr. Lay who applied for the warrant in Wagga Wagga, which the local magistrate refused to issue. Did you instruct Dr. Lay to make that application?
No. That was somebody else. I asked Dr. Lay for a certificate.
Now, you did not tell the magistrate in Sydney that a warrant had been refused in Wagga Wagga. Why not?
He did not ask me.
And you did not think it important enough to mention it?
No.
You have acknowledged that you knew that Dr. Tivy had formed a different opinion to Dr. Lay. Why did you not speak to Dr. Tivy to discuss the grounds of his opinion?
First of all, he only had about 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour in which to examine her, and that would not let a medical man form any opinion one way or another. Secondly, Dr. Lay, who had known her for months, or perhaps years, had said that he thought she was mentally deranged.
But Dr. Lay's opinion as to Sister Liguori's state of mind was formed from the circumstances of her leaving the convent and the letter she wrote. You knew that Dr. Tivy had not seen that letter. Why did you not take it to him and ask him if it would change his opinion?
I did not think it was necessary for me to see Dr. Tivy. I did not think Dr. Tivy had had the opportunity Dr. Lay had of knowing the patient.
When applying for the warrant, did you believe the statements you swore about Sister Liguori being deemed to be of unsound mind and not having sufficient means of support?
Yes, I believed those statements.
Did you believe it to be your duty to have a warrant issued for her to be arrested by the police?
First, my duty was to try and take the place of the sisters who could not do what I was doing. I was appealed to by them, and I simply wanted to verify the state of the patient's condition. She had gone away from our keeping, and we did not know where she was. The police had failed to find her, and the only way left open to us was to get her examined by medical people, to find what her condition was. If she were declared to be sane by the authorities, my duty ceased, as far as her person was concerned. If she were declared to be insane, I had to see that the convent provided her with treatment in hospital until she became well, and if she wished to go back, she could go back, but if she wished to leave, I was to see that she was provided with the means to take her back to her own home again.
Thank you, Bishop Dwyer, for providing us with further information on this troubling case. And there we have it. The jury in the court case were asked 3 questions. Did the defendant, Bishop Dwyer, take reasonable care to inform himself as to the true facts of the case? Did he honestly believe the case which he laid before the magistrate? And was he actuated by malice? What do you think?